Jake Morrison stared out the small window of the transport ship as it approached the Galactic Defense Academy. The massive station floated in space like a metal city, with lights blinking along its curved walls. He had never seen anything so big before. Back on Earth's colony world of New Texas, the biggest building was the grain storage facility. This place could hold 1,000 of those buildings. The pilot, a blue-skinned alien with 4 eyes, spoke without turning around. "First time seeing the Academy, human?" "Yes," Jake said. He pressed his face closer to the window. The Academy kept growing larger as they got closer. Ships of all sizes moved around it like busy insects. Most species send their best warriors. "Here," the pilot continued. "What makes humans think they belong?" Jake did not answer. He had asked himself the same question many times during the long journey from Earth. Humans had not been part of the galactic military for over 200 years. Most alien species thought humans were too primitive to fight alongside them. But something had changed. The Academy had decided to accept one human student as a test. That human was Jake Morrison, a 22-year-old engineer from a farming colony. He was not the strongest human or the smartest. He was not even a real soldier. But he had scored high on the Academy's entrance tests, especially the parts about problem-solving and creative thinking. The transport ship docked with a loud clang. Jake grabbed his small bag of belongings and followed the pilot through the airlock. The inside of the Academy looked nothing like the ships he had traveled on. The walls were white and clean, with soft lights that did not hurt his eyes. The air smelled fresh and cool, thought other new students, walked through the wide hallways. Jake saw aliens he had only heard about in stories. There was a tall creature with gray skin and 6 arms carrying 3 different weapons. Another alien looked like. It was made of living crystal, its body catching the light and throwing rainbow colors on the walls. A third student had fur and walked on 4 legs, but its front paws could grab things like hands. They all looked at Jake as he passed. Some seemed curious. Others looked annoyed. A few laughed and whispered to their friends in languages. Jake did not understand. Jake found his room number and pressed his hand on the door scanner. The door slid open with a soft hiss. The room was small but clean, with a bed, a desk, and a view of space through another window. His roommate was already there. The alien stood about 7 feet tall with dark green skin that looked like tree bark. It had 2 large eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth. When it saw Jake, it made a sound like grinding stones. "You are the human," it said in broken galactic standard, the common language used throughout the galaxy. "I am Jake Morrison," Jake said, offering his hand. The alien looked at Jake's hand but did not take it. "I am Korth from the warrior world of Granite Prime. My people have fought in galactic wars for 800 years. "What wars have humans fought?" Jake lowered his hand. "We have fought many wars, but mostly with each other." Korth made the grinding sound again, which Jake realized was probably laughter. Primitive species always fight themselves first. "When do you learn to fight real enemies?" "I guess that is what I am here to learn," Jake said. The next morning, Jake joined the other new students in a large room called the Assembly Hall. Commander Vexthul walked onto the stage at the front. The commander was impressive and frightening at the same time. He stood 8 feet tall with dark red skin that looked like armor. 4 powerful arms moved as he talked, and his voice was deep and strong. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy," Commander Vexthul said. "You are here because your worlds chose you as their best. You will learn to fight together, to think together, and to protect the galaxy together." His 4 eyes looked across the room and stopped on Jake. "Some of you come from species that are new to galactic warfare. Some come from worlds with long military traditions. But here, you are all the same. You are all students." The commander explained the Academy's rules and schedule. Students would train for 1 year in weapons, tactics, space combat, and alien psychology. The best students would graduate early by winning the War Games, a competition held every 6 months. The War Games test everything you learn here, Commander Vexthal said. Teams of 6 students compete in combat simulations. The winning team graduates immediately and receives the best military positions in the galaxy. After the assembly, students were divided into training groups. Jake found himself in a group with 5 aliens from different worlds. There was Zarakith, the crystal-skinned Selenian who seemed to glow with her own light. Graxmore was a massive Bovarian with thick muscles and small eyes. Hixival came from Nebula 7 and had purple skin and a large brain case that pulsed with strange lights. Quindar looked like a bird person with wings and hollow bones, built for flying. Tolmain was amphibious, with smooth skin that always looked wet and gills on the sides of his neck. Their first instructor was Sergeant Caligdros, a reptilian Vorthek with yellow eyes and scales that changed color when he was angry. Right now, his scales were bright red. "Your group is called Omega Team," he said, his voice like a snake's hiss. "Omega means last. That is because you have been given the human." The alien students looked at Jake. Some seemed embarrassed. Others nodded. In agreement. "Sir," Zarakith said, her voice making musical sounds like wind chimes, "why do we have to train with a primitive species? Humans do not even have proper weapons technology." Sergeant Caligdros' scales turned darker red. "You will train with the human because the Academy decided. But you are right to be concerned. Humans think differently than civilized species. They are unpredictable and often ignore proper military procedures." He led them to the weapons training room. The walls were lined with energy rifles, plasma swords, and devices Jake did not recognize. The other students moved toward the weapons like they had been using them all their lives. "Morrison," Sergeant Caligdros called. "Show us what human weapons training looks like." Jake picked up an energy rifle. It was lighter than the ballistic weapons he had used on New Texas, but the controls were confusing. He aimed at a target and pulled what he thought was the trigger. Nothing happened. "The safety switch," Zarakith said, not trying to hide her amusement. "Even children on my world know about safety switches." Jake found the switch and tried again. This time the rifle fired, but the energy beam went wide and hit the wall instead of the target. The other students laughed, their various alien sounds mixing together. "Humans," Sergeant Caligdros said, his scales now almost black. 200 years ago, they used metal projectiles fired by chemical explosions. Primitive weapons for a primitive species." Jake's face grew hot with embarrassment, but he said nothing. He had known this would be difficult. He had not known it would be humiliating. The weapons training continued for 2 hours. The alien students hit their targets easily and showed Jake how to use different types of energy weapons. They were not mean about it, but they clearly thought he was slow to learn. During a break, Graxmore approached Jake. The big Bovarian had to look down to meet Jake's eyes. "Human," he said. "On my world, warriors who cannot use weapons become farmers or builders." "What will you become?" "I am already an engineer," Jake said. "I build things." "Then why are you here trying to be a warrior?" Jake thought about the question. Why was he here? He could have stayed on New Texas, married his girlfriend Amy, and lived a quiet life fixing farm equipment. Instead, he had volunteered to represent humanity at the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy. "Because someone has to be," he said finally. Graxmore made a rumbling sound that might have been approval or might have been indigestion. It was hard to tell with Bavarians. That night, Jake lay in his bed looking out at the stars. Korth was already asleep, making sounds like a rock crusher. Jake wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The other students were faster, stronger, and better with weapons. They had been raised in military cultures where warfare was an art form, but Jake remembered something his grandfather had told him back on Earth. "Son," the old man had said, "it is not always the biggest dog that wins the fight. Sometimes it is the one that thinks the most." Jake smiled and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he would rest and think. Thinking, after all, might be the one thing he could do better than his alien classmates. 3 months had passed since Jake arrived at the academy. The other students had stopped laughing at him during weapons training, but only because they had grown tired of it. Jake still struggled with the energy weapons that came naturally to his alien classmates. His scores remained at the bottom of every test, but something strange had started happening in their tactical exercises. When Sergeant Caligaros gave them problems to solve, Jake often came up with answers that surprised everyone. While the other students planned elaborate attacks using advanced weapons and formation flying, Jake suggested simpler solutions that often worked better. During one exercise, their team had to capture a fortified position defended by automated turrets. Zarakith proposed a frontal assault with energy shields. Graxmore wanted to smash through the barriers with heavy weapons. Hixival created a complex plan involving electronic warfare and coordinated strikes. Jake studied the problem for a few minutes, then pointed to a drainage pipe that led under the fortification. Why not just crawl through there and turn off the power from inside? The alien student stared at him. The pipe was dirty and narrow. It would be uncomfortable and undignified for a proper warrior to crawl through mud. That is not how military operations work, Zarakith said, her crystal skin flashing with irritation. We use proper tactics and advanced technology. But it would work, Jake said quietly. Sergeant Colagdros made them try all the plans. The elaborate attacks failed when the turrets destroyed their energy shields and detected their electronic warfare attempts. Jake's simple approach worked perfectly. The automated defenses never thought to watch a drainage pipe. The sergeant's scales turned dark green, which Jake had learned meant he was thinking hard. Morrison's solution worked, but it was not proper military thinking. Real warriors do not crawl through sewers. Why not if it wins the battle? Jake asked. The question hung in the air like a bad smell. The other students looked uncomfortable. In their cultures, there were right ways and wrong ways to fight. Honor and tradition mattered as much as victory. Similar incidents happened almost every week. When asked to plan an attack on an enemy supply depot, Jake suggested waiting for the guards to change shifts and walking in through the front door dressed as delivery workers. When given a problem about defeating superior numbers, Jake proposed making the enemy think they were fighting a much larger force by using mirrors and sound recordings. His solutions worked during simulations, but they made his instructors and classmates increasingly uncomfortable. Warriors were supposed to be brave and direct. They were supposed to use their training and technology to overcome challenges. Jake's methods seemed like cheating, even when they were not against the rules. The breaking point came during a space combat simulation. Omega Team was assigned 2 small fighters to attack a much larger enemy ship. The traditional approach would be to use their speed and weapons to dart in and out, gradually wearing down the bigger ship's defenses. Zarakith took command of one fighter and began the standard attack pattern. Jake piloted the second fighter but did not follow her lead. Instead, he flew directly at the enemy ship's cargo bay and landed inside it. "Morrison, what are you doing?" Zarakith's voice crackled over the radio. "You cannot win a space battle by landing on the enemy ship." "Watch me," Jake said. On his screen, he accessed the enemy ship's internal systems and began shutting down their weapons and engines from the inside. The simulation ended with Jake's unconventional victory. The enemy ship was disabled without firing a single shot from his fighters' weapons. But when the training pod opened, Jake found himself facing angry alien faces. That was not space combat, Quindar said, her feathers ruffled with indignation. That was more like burglary. The objective was to disable the enemy ship, Jake replied. Mission accomplished. Using proper space combat tactics, HFY added, the lights in his brain case pulsing rapidly. Not by parking inside their cargo hold like a parasite. Sergeant. Kelleg Droz approached with his scales bright red. Morrison, your methods are becoming disruptive to proper military training. These students need to learn real combat skills, not tricks and shortcuts. Why are tricks and shortcuts not real combat skills? Jake asked. If they work better than the regular methods? The sergeant's scales turned almost black. Because warfare is about honor, discipline, and the proper use of military technology. It is not about crawling through pipes and sneaking around like a criminal. Even if crawling through pipes wins the war. Especially then, the sergeant hissed. Victory without honor is not victory at all. That evening, Jake sat alone in the dining hall. The other students from Omega Team had found seats at different tables. Even Korth, his roommate, seemed to avoid him lately. Jake ate his synthesized protein cake and wondered if he should just give up and go home. Zarakith approached his table. Her crystal skin was glowing softly, which usually meant she was calm, but her voice was sharp. We need to talk, she said. Sitting across from him. About what? About you ruining our team's reputation, she said. The other teams laugh at us because we have the human who fights like a coward. Jake put down his fork. How am I fighting like a coward? Real warriors face their enemies directly. They use their strength, their training, and their weapons to win battles. You hide and sneak and use tricks that no honorable species would consider, but my tricks work. Zarakith's glow became brighter and more harsh. That is not the point. My people have been warriors for 3,000 years. We have traditions and codes of honor that go back to when your species was still hitting rocks with sticks. Maybe we learned something useful while we were hitting rocks with sticks. Like what? How to be sneaky and dishonest. Jake felt his temper rising. For 3 months, he had listened to comments about primitive humans and backwards thinking. He had accepted that he was slower with advanced weapons and worse at energy combat. But he was tired of being told that human ways of thinking were wrong. Like how to survive when everyone else has better weapons, he said. Like how to win when the odds are against you. Like how to solve problems instead of just throwing technology at them. Other students had stopped eating to listen to their argument. Jake could see aliens from at least 6 different species watching them. Zarakith stood up, her crystal body now blazing with light. Fine, if you think human methods are so superior, prove it. How? Challenge me to a combat exercise. You end your primitive thinking against me and proper military training. Jake also stood up. The dining hall had gone completely quiet. Just you and me? No, Zarakith said, looking around at the watching students. You against a team. Me, Graxmore. Hixival, Quindar, and Tolmain. 5 against 1. Graxmore rumbled his approval from across the room. Good idea. Show the human what real warriors can do. Quindar flew over to their table. I accept the challenge. It is time to settle this. Hixival and Tolmain joined them. Soon Jake was surrounded by the 5 best students from his training group, all of them eager to prove that their advanced military training was superior to human tricks. What kind of combat? Jake asked. No energy weapons, Zarakith said. No advanced technology. Just natural skills and whatever tools we can find in the environment. The way primitive species used to fight before they learned proper warfare. Jake smiled for the first time in weeks. You want to fight the way humans used to fight? Yes, to prove that civilized methods are better. And if I win? You will not win, Graxmore said. But if you somehow do, we will admit that human methods have value. And if you win? Zarakith's glow became steady and cold. Then you admit that humans do not belong in advanced military training, and you go back to your primitive world. Jake looked around at the watching students. Word of the challenge was already spreading through the dining hall. Some aliens were making excited noises in their own languages. Others were shaking their heads or making what might have been bets. This was not just about him anymore. This was about whether humans deserved a place in the galactic military. It was about whether different ways of thinking had value, or whether there was only one right way to be a warrior. "I accept," Jake said. The dining hall erupted in noise. Students from every species began talking at once, planning to watch the exhibition. Match. Some seemed excited by the prospect of seeing a human humiliated. Others appeared curious about what would happen when primitive methods met advanced training. Sergeant Calegdros pushed through the crowd of students. His scales were cycling through different colors as he tried to process what had happened. "This is highly irregular," he said. "Combat challenges between students require approval from Commander Vexthal." "Then let us ask him," Zarakith said, her confidence blazing as bright as her crystal skin. 20 minutes later, they stood in Commander Vexthal's office. The four-armed commander listened to their request with two of his eyes, while the other two read reports on his desk. "You want to fight 5 against 1 using primitive methods," he said when they finished explaining. "Yes, sir," Jake said. "In a wilderness environment with no manufactured weapons." "Yes, sir." Commander Vexthal set down his reports and looked at Jake with all 4 eyes. "And you believe you can defeat 5 trained warriors using human methods?" Jake had 3 days to prepare for the most important fight of his life. While his alien opponents trained together in the combat rooms, Jake did something that surprised everyone. He went to the Academy's library. The library was a massive room, filled with data terminals and holographic displays. Most students only came here to research enemy tactics or study weapon specifications. Jake spent hours reading about something completely different. He studied the personal files of his 5 opponents. The Academy kept detailed records of every student's background, psychology, and physical capabilities. Jake learned that Zarakith came from a crystal desert world where her people lived in cities made of living rock. They were proud and direct fighters who believed in facing enemies with honor and strength. Zarakith had never lost a combat exercise at the Academy. Graxmore was from Bovara, a heavy gravity world where strength was everything. His people settled disputes by wrestling and considered retreat to be the worst possible shame. Graxmore could lift 3 times his own weight and had reflexes fast enough to catch thrown objects. But Jake noticed something interesting in his medical records. Graxmore's eyes were set forward in his skull like a predator. This gave him excellent vision straight ahead but poor peripheral vision to the sides. HFY came from Nebula 7, a world of philosophers and strategists. His people spent decades planning single battles and considered patience to be the highest virtue. HFY could calculate complex tactical problems in his head and predict enemy movements several steps ahead. However, his psychological profile showed he became confused when his careful plans were disrupted by unexpected actions. Quindar was from Arios, a low-gravity world with floating cities. Her people were natural flyers who fought aerial battles among the clouds. She was incredibly fast in the air and could change direction instantly. But Jake read that Quindar had never fought on solid ground before coming to the Academy. All her training was based on 3-dimensional aerial combat. Tomaine came from Hydros Prime, an ocean world where his people lived underwater. He was an excellent swimmer and could hold his breath for over an hour. His skin could absorb moisture from the air, but Jake noticed that his performance ratings dropped significantly in dry environments. He needed to stay wet to maintain his strength and speed. Jake made notes about each opponent's strengths and weaknesses. But more importantly, He studied their psychological profiles. Zaraketh was confident to the point of arrogance. Graxmore was aggressive and direct. Hixival relied on careful planning. Quindar preferred speed and mobility. Tolmain worked best in humid conditions. On the second day, Jake visited Training Arena 7 to study the environment where they would fight. The arena was designed to look like a natural wilderness. It had forests, rocky hills, streams, and open meadows. Jake walked through every section, making mental maps of the terrain. He found caves hidden behind waterfalls, narrow passages between rocks, and trees with branches strong enough to support weight. He located sources of fresh water, areas of soft soil, and places where sound would echo. Jake spent 8 hours exploring the arena, much longer than most students bothered to spend. The arena supervisors thought Jake was wasting time. They had seen many combat exercises in this environment. Most fights ended quickly with direct confrontation in the open areas. Students rarely used the complex terrain features that made the arena expensive to maintain. Jake also studied the rules of the exhibition match. No manufactured weapons were allowed, but natural materials were permitted. Students could use rocks, sticks, plants, and anything else they found in the environment. The match would end when one side surrendered or was unable to continue fighting. Serious injury was not allowed, but bruises and minor cuts were expected. Commander Vexthal had decided that Jake could win by eliminating all 5 opponents or by holding a defensive position for 4 hours. His opponents could win by eliminating Jake or forcing him to surrender. The rules seemed to favor the alien team, since Jake had to last 4 times longer than normal combat exercises. While Jake studied and explored, his opponents trained hard in the Academy's combat rooms. They practiced formation fighting and coordinated attacks. Zaraketh worked on her energy manipulation techniques, even though she would not be allowed to use energy weapons. Graxmore lifted weights and practiced hand-to-hand combat. Hixival created battle plans and contingency strategies. Quindar flew obstacle courses to improve her speed and agility. Tolmain practiced fighting in dry conditions to prepare for the arena environment. The alien students were confident and well prepared. They had trained together for months and knew each other's abilities perfectly. Their instructors praised their teamwork and tactical coordination. Several faculty members predicted the match would end in less than 30 minutes. Jake spent his 3rd day doing something that puzzled everyone even more. He sat in his room and made things with his hands. Using materials from the Academy's workshop, he crafted small tools and devices. He wove plant fibers into thin ropes. He carved wooden pieces into specific shapes. He ground rocks into different textures and sizes. Korth watched him work with growing confusion. "What are you making, human?" "Just some simple tools," Jake said. "Tying knots in a piece of rope. Those are not weapons." "No, they are not weapons. Then how will you fight 5 warriors?" Jake looked up from his work. "Who said anything about fighting?" Korth's stone-like face showed rare emotion. "It is a combat exercise. Of course there will be fighting. The rules say I have to eliminate my opponents or hold a defensive position for 4 hours. They do not say I have to fight them." "How can you eliminate enemies without fighting them?" Jake smiled and went back to his rope work. "There are many ways to win a battle. Fighting is just one of them." That evening, Jake had dinner with Lisa Carter, the human liaison officer. She was the only other human at the Academy and had been watching Jake's progress with growing concern. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, picking at her synthesized vegetables. "If you lose badly, it could set back human integration by decades." "I know," Jake said. "The betting pools are running 100 to 1 against you. Some faculty members think this whole exhibition is a mistake. Maybe it is." Lisa leaned forward. "Then why are you doing it?" Jake thought about the question. Why was he risking his future and humanity's reputation on a fight he was almost certain to lose? He could have ignored Zaraketh's challenge or found an excuse to back down. Nobody would have blamed him for refusing to fight 5 opponents at once. Because someone has to show them that different does not mean wrong, he said finally. For 3 months, I have watched aliens dismiss human methods as primitive and worthless. Maybe they are right. Maybe our ways of thinking have no place in advanced warfare. But you do not believe that. No, I do not. Humans have survived for thousands of years by adapting and improvising. We have won wars against enemies with better weapons and superior numbers. Not because we were stronger or smarter, but because we were willing to try things that nobody else would consider. Lisa nodded slowly. And if you are wrong? Then I go home to New Texas and marry Amy and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. And if you are right? Jake smiled. Then maybe the galaxy learns that there is more than one way to be a warrior. The next morning, Jake woke before dawn. He gathered his handmade tools and headed to Training Arena 7. The exhibition match would begin at 0800 hours. But Jake wanted time to prepare the battlefield. He entered the arena alone and immediately began moving through the terrain he had memorized. Jake worked quickly and quietly, placing his tools and devices in specific locations. He modified the environment in subtle ways that would not be noticed by casual observation. Jake knew that his opponents would enter the arena expecting a conventional fight. They would look for good positions to attack from and defensible areas to fall back to. They would think like trained warriors using standard tactics. But Jake was not planning a standard fight. He was planning something that no academy instructor had ever taught and no alien warrior had ever seen. He was planning to win a battle without throwing a single punch or wielding a single weapon. As the sun rose over the academy, Jake finished his preparations and settled into position. In 2 hours, 5 of the galaxy's best young warriors would enter this arena looking for a fight. Instead, they would find a puzzle that would challenge everything they thought they knew about combat, strategy, and the nature of victory itself. Jake closed his eyes and waited. The most important test of his life was about to begin. At exactly 0800 hours, the 5 alien warriors entered Training Arena 7. The observation deck above was packed with students and faculty from every species in the academy. Commander Vexthul stood at the center of the viewing area with his 4 arms crossed, watching intently. Zaraketh led the alien team into the arena. Her crystal skin blazed with confident light as she surveyed the forest and rocky terrain. Behind her came Graxmore, his massive frame moving with surprising grace. Hixival followed, already analyzing the environment and calculating tactical options. Quindar flew overhead in lazy circles, scouting from above. Tolmain brought up the rear, moving toward the nearest stream to keep his skin moist. Spread out in standard search formation, Zaraketh commanded. The human is here somewhere. We find him, corner him, and end this quickly. The team moved into the forest with professional precision. They had trained together for months and knew each other's abilities perfectly. Graxmore took point, using his strength to push through thick vegetation. Hixival stayed in the center, coordinating their movements. Quindar maintained aerial reconnaissance while Tolmain covered their rear approach. They searched for 20 minutes without finding any sign of Jake. No footprints in the mud. No broken branches, no disturbance of the forest floor. It was as if the human had simply vanished into thin air. This is taking too long, Graxmore rumbled. The human must be hiding like a coward. Stay calm, Hixival said, the lights in his brain case pulsing steadily. He has to be here somewhere. Continue the systematic search. But as they moved deeper into the forest, strange things began to happen. Quindar was the first to notice something wrong. As she flew between 2 large trees, thin fibers suddenly caught across her wings. She struggled for a moment, thinking. She had flown into a spider web, but the strands were too strong and perfectly positioned. "Something is wrong here," she called down to the others. "These are not natural." She managed to break free, but her confidence was shaken. Someone had strung nearly invisible threads between the trees at exactly the right height to catch a flying. Arios, someone who had studied her habits and knew how she moved through the air. 20 minutes later, Graxmore triggered the first major trap. He was pushing through a dense thicket when his foot stepped on what seemed like solid ground. Suddenly, a carefully balanced pile of rocks tumbled down from above with a tremendous crash. The rocks did not hit Graxmore directly, but the noise was deafening in the quiet forest. Birds flew away in panic and small animals scattered in all directions. More importantly, the crash destroyed the team's communication discipline as everyone shouted questions and warnings at once. "Report!" Zarakith called, her crystal skin flashing with alarm. "I am unharmed," Graxmore said, looking up at the now empty ledge above. "But someone arranged those rocks to fall. The human has been here." Hixival studied the fallen stones with growing unease. The trap was simple but perfectly designed. It had not been meant to injure Graxmore, just to make noise and disturb their formation. "This suggests the human has been preparing the battlefield for some time." "Impossible," Zarakith said. "He only had 3 days. How could he set up elaborate traps in that time? Maybe human methods are not as primitive as we thought." Tomaine said quietly. As they regrouped and continued searching, more problems emerged. Quindar discovered that many of the trees she wanted to use for aerial advantage had been subtly modified. Branches had been weakened with careful cuts or weighted with stones. What looked like safe landing spots were actually traps that would collapse under her weight. Tall single quotes Maine found that the streams he needed for hydration had been altered. Someone had diverted the clean water away from the main channels and replaced it with stagnant pools full of harmless but terrible-tasting algae. His skin began to dry out as he was forced to move away from his preferred water sources. Hixival. Careful tactical planning was disrupted when his environmental scanners detected multiple heat signatures that appeared to be Jake Morrison. But when the team investigated, they found only collections of sun-warmed stones arranged to give off human-like thermal patterns. "He is making us chase shadows," Hixival said, his brain case lights pulsing rapidly with frustration. "Every plan I make becomes useless when the data is false." But the worst torment was reserved for Zarakith. As the team moved through different areas of the forest, she began to hear sounds that made her crystal skin vibrate uncomfortably. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a low humming that seemed to come from nowhere. But gradually the sounds grew stronger and more focused. Jake had carved hollow reeds and pieces of wood into simple wind instruments, positioning them throughout the forest where natural air currents would create sound. The musical tones were carefully tuned to resonate with Selenian crystal physiology, creating an effect like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Do you hear that?" Zarakith asked, her usual confident glow becoming erratic. "Hear what?" Graxmore said. "That sound, that horrible humming." The others listened but heard nothing unusual. The wind instruments were designed specifically for Selenian hearing, producing frequencies that other species could not detect. To Zarakith, it sounded like the forest itself was singing an off-key song that made her teeth ache. 2 hours into the exercise, the alien team's cohesion was falling apart. They had found no trace of Jake Morrison except for the evidence of his preparations. Every natural feature of the arena had been turned into a potential threat. Every step forward brought new psychological pressure. Quindar could no longer fly with confidence, knowing that invisible threads might catch her wings at any moment. Graxmore jumped at every small sound, expecting another avalanche of rocks. Tomaine grew weaker as his skin dried out. Hixival's strategic thinking was paralyzed by unreliable information. Zarakith's leadership wavered as the constant humming Sounds made concentration impossible. "This is not combat," she said, her crystal skin flickering with nervous energy. "This is psychological torture. Where is he?" Graxmore shouted at the forest. "Come out and fight like a warrior." His voice echoed among the trees, but there was no answer dot in the observation deck above. The watching students and faculty were beginning to understand what they were seeing. This was not a conventional fight between warriors. This was something entirely different. "Fascinating," Commander Vexthal said to Sergeant Killigdros. "The human has turned the entire arena into a weapon." The sergeant's scales were cycling through confused colors. "But where is he? How can he be controlling all these effects without being seen? Perhaps he does not need to be seen to be effective." As the third hour began, the alien team made a desperate decision. They abandoned their careful search pattern and moved quickly toward the center of the arena, hoping to force a direct confrontation. If Jake was hiding somewhere in the forest, they would drive him out into the open. They reached a large clearing, surrounded by rocky hills, and stood in the center, weapons ready. Zaraketh called out in a voice that carried across the entire arena. "Enough games, human. Come out and face us. Or are you too much of a coward to fight like a real warrior?" For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, from the rocks above, Jake Morrison stepped into view. He looked calm and relaxed, as if he had been taking a pleasant walk in the woods. His clothes were clean, and his breathing was steady. He carried no weapons and showed no signs of stress or fatigue. "Hello," he said, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. "Have you been looking for me?" The 5 alien warriors turned to face him, but something was wrong. Jake was standing in what was clearly a prepared position. The rocks around him had been carefully arranged, and there were construction materials visible that had not been there during their earlier searches. "You have been hiding like a coward," Zaraketh accused, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "Have I?" Jake asked. "I have been right here the whole time working." "Working on what?" Jake smiled and gestured to the elaborate stone constructions around his position. "On showing you something interesting." Graxmore growled with frustration. "Stop talking and fight us." "I do not want to fight you," Jake said. "I want to teach you something." "Teach us what?" "That I could have eliminated all of you any time I wanted." The alien warriors looked at each other with confusion. They were standing in the open, unharmed and ready for battle. How could the human claim he could have eliminated them? "You are bluffing," Hixival said, though his brain case lights were pulsing uncertainly. "Am I?" Jake asked. He pointed to a spot near Graxmore's feet. "Look down." Graxmore looked down and saw a circle of rocks around his position. As he watched, Jake triggered a simple mechanism, and the rocks shifted to reveal that Graxmore had been standing over a carefully concealed pit. If Jake had wanted to, he could have dropped the big Bovarian into a hole lined with sharp stakes. "And you, Quindar," Jake continued, pointing upward. Quindar looked up to see a net of woven fibers suspended above the clearing. If Jake had released it at any point during the exercise, she would have been trapped and brought down from the sky. One by one, Jake revealed how he could have eliminated each team member. Tolmain had been walking past hidden snares that could have caught his legs. Hixival had been standing near rockfall triggers that could. The silence in the arena stretched for long moments as the 5 alien warriors processed what Jake had revealed. They stood frozen in the clearing, surrounded by evidence of traps they had never seen coming. Above them, hundreds of students and faculty watched from the observation deck, equally stunned by what they were witnessing. Zaraketh was the first to find her voice, though her crystal skin flickered with uncertain light. "You could have hurt us at any time?" "Yes," Jake said simply. "But hurting you was never the point." "Then what was the point?" Graxmore demanded, his voice shaking with confusion and something that might have been fear. Jake stepped down from his position among the rocks, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. The point was to show you that victory does not always require violence, that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to avoid fighting at all. HFY's brain case lights pulsed rapidly as he tried to understand. But this was a combat exercise. We came here to test our warrior skills against yours. And you did, Jake said. You used your training, your teamwork, and your advanced knowledge of military tactics. You did everything correctly according to your traditions and teachings. But we lost, Quindar said quietly, her feathers drooping with shame. Did you? You are all still here, unharmed and healthy. Your honor is intact. Your skills were tested and proven. How is that losing? Tolmain's skin had begun to glow with the moisture he was absorbing from the humid air near the stream. Because you defeated us without even fighting. You made us look foolish. Jake shook his head. I did not make you look foolish. I used different methods than you expected, that is all. If this had been a traditional combat exercise with energy weapons and standard tactics, you would have defeated me easily. Your training is excellent and your skills are real. Then why did you choose this type of fight? Zaraketh asked. Because sometimes the rules change, Jake said. Sometimes you face an enemy who does not fight the way you were taught to expect. Sometimes you need to adapt and improvise and think beyond your training. He gestured to the forest around them. Everything I used here came from this environment. Rocks, wood, plant fibers, water, sound, and gravity. No advanced technology, no manufactured weapons. Nothing that would not have been available to any species for thousands of years. Primitive tools, Graxmore said, but his tone was no longer dismissive. Simple tools, Jake corrected, but used in ways that your advanced training did not prepare you for. From the observation deck, Commander Vexthl's voice echoed across the arena through the communication system. The exhibition match is concluded. Cadet Morrison has demonstrated tactical superiority through environmental control and psychological warfare. All participants report to the debriefing room. But none of the aliens moved to leave. They remained in the clearing, staring at Jake with new understanding. How did you know? HFY asked. How did you know exactly what would affect each of us? I studied you, Jake said. Not just your combat abilities, but your psychology, your backgrounds, your cultures. I learned what made you confident and what made you doubt yourselves. That seems like cheating, Quindar said, though she did not sound angry anymore. Is it cheating to understand your opponent? Every military academy in the galaxy teaches students to study enemy capabilities and weaknesses. I just applied that principle to individuals instead of entire species. Zaraketh's crystal skin had stopped flickering and now glowed with steady, thoughtful light. You turned our strengths into weaknesses. I turned your expectations against you, Jake said. Graxmore, your people value direct confrontation, so you did not look for subtle traps. Quindar, your aerial superiority made you forget to check for hidden obstacles. HFY, your strategic planning required accurate information, so false data paralyzed your decision-making. And me? Tolmain asked. You needed water to stay strong, so I made the water unpleasant. Not poisonous or harmful, just undrinkable. Enough to force you away from your preferred positions. What about me? Zaraketh demanded. Jake looked uncomfortable for the first time. Your people have excellent hearing because of your crystal structure. I used that against you with sound frequencies that only you could hear. I am sorry about that. It was probably the cruelest thing I did today. Zaraketh was quiet for a moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, she began to laugh. The sound was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, musical and bright. You studied us for 3 days and found ways to neutralize 5 different species using nothing but rocks and sticks, and your understanding of psychology, she said. That is not primitive thinking, that is brilliant thinking. It is human thinking, Jake said. My species learned to survive by being adaptable and creative. When everyone else had better weapons, we learned to use better tactics. When everyone else was stronger, we learned to be smarter. Graxmore walked over to one of the concealed pits and looked down into it. The sharp stakes at the bottom were made from sharpened wood, positioned to incapacitate rather than kill. You could have seriously injured me with this trap, he said. Yes. But I chose not to. The stakes are positioned to catch and hold, not to pierce vital organs. You would have been stuck and angry, but not permanently harmed. Why? Because the goal was to prove a point, not to hurt anyone. Violence should be the last resort, not the first choice. HFY had found one of the heat signature decoys and was examining the arrangement of warmed stones. This is quite sophisticated for such simple materials. Simple does not mean stupid, Jake said. Some of the most effective solutions are also the most basic ones. From the observation deck, students and faculty were beginning to leave, but many stayed to continue watching. The exhibition match was over, but the conversation in the arena was just beginning. What happens now? Quindar asked. Now we learn from each other, Jake said. You teach me about energy weapons and advanced tactics. I teach you about improvisation and environmental warfare. We all become better warriors. The Academy will allow this? Tolmain asked. Commander Vexthul's voice came over the communication system again. Cadet Morrison, report to my office immediately. The rest of you, proceed to the debriefing room. An hour later, Jake sat across from Commander Vexthul in the four-armed alien's office. The commander had been quiet for several minutes, reviewing. Recordings of the exhibition match on his desk display. Remarkable, he said finally. In 40 years of military service, I have never seen anything quite like that. Was it acceptable, sir? Jake asked. Acceptable? It was revolutionary. You defeated 5 trained warriors without causing a single injury or firing a single shot. You used psychological warfare, environmental manipulation, and tactical deception to achieve complete battlefield control. Yes, sir. And you learned these techniques where? From human military history, sir. And from growing up on a frontier world where you had to be creative to survive. Commander Vexthul leaned back in his chair, all 4 of his eyes focused on Jake. I am going to make some changes to the Academy's curriculum. Your methods will be studied and taught alongside traditional combat techniques. Sir, furthermore, you will be promoted to instructor status immediately. Your specialty will be unconventional warfare and adaptive tactics. Jake felt his heart racing. What about my training as a student? Consider it complete. You have demonstrated abilities that our current faculty cannot teach. It would be a waste to have you sit through classes on subjects you have already mastered. And the other students, my teammates, they have all requested to continue training with you. It seems your victory has earned their respect as well as their curiosity. That evening, Jake found himself in the Academy's dining hall surrounded by students from every species. Word of the exhibition match had spread throughout the station, and everyone wanted to hear details about human combat methods. Zaraketh sat across from him, her crystal skin glowing with excitement. Tell us about other human tactics. What else? Can you teach us? Camouflage techniques, Jake said. Guerrilla warfare. Psychological operations. How to fight when outnumbered and outgunned. These are all human specialties, Graxmore asked. They had to be. We were usually the underdogs, HFY leaned forward. And now? Jake looked around at the eager faces of alien students who had dismissed him as primitive just hours before. Now we are all on the same side. Human creativity, Selenian energy manipulation, Bovarian strength, Nebulite strategy, Aerios mobility, and Hygros adaptability. Imagine what we could accomplish working together. A formidable military force, Quindar said. More than that, Jake said. A new way of thinking about warfare itself. not just as a contest of strength or technology, but as a test of creativity, adaptability, and understanding. Tomain raised his glass of water in a toast to learning from each other. To diversity of thought, Zarakith added. To victory without violence, Jake said. They drank together. 6 young warriors from 6 different worlds, united by the understanding that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the oldest methods were still the most effective. Outside, the dining hall windows, the stars of 1,000 worlds sparkled in the darkness, each one home to species with their own ways of thinking and fighting. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that would require every kind of wisdom to overcome. But, for the fee,